All right, so without further ado, let's get rolling. I'm Reza. I'm Principal Program Manager for Java on Azure at Microsoft. In the context of this particular talk, I'm actually the Microsoft representative in the Jakarta EE working group. So what we'll be talking a little bit today about is the possibilities for what's beyond Jakarta EE 11. Obviously, that's Jakarta EE 12, and talking a little bit about what that content may be. Now, bear in mind, one of the key things here is that it's Jakarta EE is a multi-vendor thing. Nobody controls anything. There is no formal roadmap. The roadmap is what we all define, and that is what makes this particular talk even more important. Is because we all, including yourself, I hope, will get involved in the process and help us define precisely what Jakarta E12 is going to be. But this is just simply some ideas on behalf of myself and Emily, and in fact the Jakarta ambassadors, which I'll talk about in a moment about what we envision in Jakarta E12 and beyond. So I should not neglect to mention that Emily will be, I'll be handing off to my colleague from IBM. Emily, she'll introduce herself. I think that's really the best thing to do. And I'll be sort of handing over to her about halfway mark. So maybe in about 10 minutes or so, I'll be handing off the presentation to her. Won't be making too much ceremony. Hopefully it'll be just a seamless transition from me to her. So thank you very much. I do hope this is going to be worth your time. There's a bunch of things that I've already shared in the chat. Please do take a look at that. One of the key things there that I'd like to mention is that we're rather compacted here, and that's maybe to some extent a good thing, because if you're not really interested in the deep details of what may be coming in Jakarta E12, maybe this is the right session for you. However, if you are the kind of person, or maybe become the kind of person as a result of this session, is interested in learning a little bit more, I've also posted a link to another session we'll be presenting on Friday. That's an hour-long session, and it's just a lot more slow going and a lot more detail that I'll be able to get into. Now, for those of you who haven't been following, at least you know that Jakarta EE is not a spring chicken. It's been around for forever and a day. I've been involved. I've been a user since J2E 1.4. It seems like a lifetime ago now. I've been an active participant in defining Jakarta EE, sometimes literally writing text specifications. Over the years, that's been since the tail end of Java E5 onward, and that also seems like such a lifetime now. But now we're talking about Jakarta E12. Jakarta E11 is almost out the door. The core profile is out the door. The web profile is out the door. I'll be showing you a little bit about how Jakarta E11 looks like. And of course, now we're talking about Jakarta EE12, right? Which is so very much, without going into a long-winded explanation of it, I would say the transition from Java EE to Jakarta EE is now a success. I don't think there's much arguing that is in fact the case, and now it's a matter of truly making it a success. Now, the fact that it has been around for so long and really still has an impact, I think, is a statement on its own as to why we continue to need to do this important work, frankly, for everybody in the Java ecosystem, whether they're using a Jakarta EE runtime today or not. So one of the other things I'll be using as an anchor for this particular talk, or at least for my portion, and I believe Emily will do the same thing, is one particular artifact which I have shared in the chat already, and that is the Jakarta EE Ambassadors EE12 Contribution Guide. Now, let me give you a little bit of a context about some of this as well, if you're not aware. So Jakarta Ambassadors is something, back when it was called Java EE Guardians, is something that I helped form back in the day for good reasons that continue to remain to some extent. But one of the things we did back in the Jakarta EE days is come up with this artifact that I've linked to you today, and basically will be giving a synopsis of. And I'll be honest with you, the real reason we came up with that artifact back then is to make sure that the things that we identified as gaps back then in Java EE8 do not get lost in translation, don't simply get dropped in the transition from Java EE to Jakarta EE. So this is the historical roots of this work, the contributor guide. And to some extent, it still remains, right? It remains precisely that. So you can take a look at this document, and it will basically give you a high-level overview of precisely what it is that we're talking about in terms of an active backlog for Jakarta EE as a technology, EE12 being its latest rendition. So we've had a few renditions of the contributor guide now. We've had one for 10, 11, and now 12. So you can actually take a look at what is actually being delivered in the specifications in that context. So this is basically really what this slide is all about. This is really what it's doing and what the color coding actually means. So you can see a list of features that are broken down by high-level themes. I'll be diving into a little bit of details of what these are to the extent that the time will permit. And you can see some things have made it in, some things are on the way, and some things still remain gaps, right? So it's a gamut of various different things that we are talking about. So we saw add schedule come in, or add schedule not make it quite yet, and there's a few things that happened in E11, namely better support for CDI and Jakarta persistence. That was actually a big one. Some support for virtual threads. In-memory data store made it into Jakarta EE security, and then the whole bunch of deprecations and a whole bunch of stuff that's in flight, right? So if you subtract these things, from, and of course the big one of the biggest things is a new specification in Jakarta 11, which is Jakarta data. Now you can basically deduce what we might envision reasonably as gaps for Jakarta E12 to address by effectively subtracting the things that were delivered and maybe adding a few new things, if you will. So first category of these things are things to make basically EJB unnecessary to use. So all of the things that are locked into EJB today, all of those can be usable in a much more modernized way. We've been doing that a little bit at a time, right? But there's still some things that remain. So some examples are add schedule, lock, max concurrency. I'll be talking about these things in a moment. Message listener in messaging, roles allowed in security. I believe Emily will be covering that to some detail. Again, aligning all of the things in Jakarta towards CDI. One example would be getting rid of the add context annotation in Jakarta REST in favor of just using CDI add inject. Java SE alignment, one of the key big ticket items for Jakarta 11 was essentially alignment with Java SE records, right? So that you can use records across the platform. Not all of that work was done. One of the key things that were remaining was actually record support in JSON binding, formally in the specification. Similarly, in order to make things more friendly in Java SE, you need to have things like Bootstrap APIs, and I'll show you an example of that, and you'll understand what I mean. Back then, having more standalone, modernized TCKs, a lot of that work was actually done in E11. Actually, that delayed, that was one of the reasons why E11 was delayed, but there's still some work that remains there. Closing important standardization gaps. One of the key things, in my opinion, is going to be HTTP 3. Right, so making sure that at least the servlet spec is capable of HTTP 3. And there's some other things that hopefully we'll have time to talk about. But if there's not, definitely I'll be covering, in my portion of the talk on Friday if you're interested in that. And of course, deprecation. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we need to continue to deprecate. Hopefully someday even EJB, but certainly the application client container and things like the security, Java SE security manager references across the platform. Some new specifications that have been long-standing gaps, things like configuration, NoSQL, MVC, gRPC. These are all sort of in various degrees of development, right? And all good candidates for bringing into the platform for E12 and beyond. Now, very quickly doing a super fast tour of what we're talking about when we're talking about some of the potential features. So I talked about schedule and at lock. I'll show you a concrete example of those two things, adding max concurrency. I'll show you an example of that when I talk about messaging, and also making sure that CDI actually works well with the Jakarta EE concurrency paradigms. That's yet another potential gap that remains in the platform. Here's an example of the schedule. So this is possible today using EJB, using slightly different, slightly outdated syntax, but you can do it in EJB. Well, why would you, right? You do this in all kinds of CDI beans and not just limited to EJB. So the wish here is to add the equivalent of EJB at schedule in a CDI compatible way. It's somewhat kind of there in E11, but in my opinion, really we could clean up the syntax and make it much more user-friendly in E12. So this is one of the possibilities. At lock annotation, again, there's something hidden under the hoods of EJB, but actually incredibly useful functionality. Right, so whenever you're talking about now using CDI, particularly application scope beans, in a highly concurrent application, suddenly you actually can make use of these concurrency semantics. And instead of you having to do that in the bean, you could actually do it in a declarative way. And again, we've proven this model out for years, right? This has existed in EJB since E6 actually. So again, this is one of those things that we could bring out and make shine in CDI land instead. Jakarta messaging, hugely important one, and I'm running out of time, so I'm really going to hurry up and I'm going to hand it over to Emily just as quickly as possible. Jakarta messaging, hugely important and once incredibly popular API. Hasn't been revision, hasn't had a rep for a little while, but a lot of important stuff here, a lot of good stuff here that if we revive this and make it really a modern, polished API, really it could play a very key role in breathing new life into Java messaging in general, and certainly the Jakarta platform itself. The message listener example, I'll show you. You'll see that for yourself why that's so interesting. Yet another thing is creating a light version of Jakarta messaging, more suitable to cloud native runtimes, right? So this is a very old API. You can actually take a fresh look at it and create a light version of it that's more suitable to today's messaging, cloud native messaging environments. Having a standalone Bootstrap API, again, code will speak much louder than words, and I'm just going to show you the code in just a moment. Things like interoperability with other standards. AMQP is one of them. MQTT is yet another. So this is another vast, pretty important and interesting area that we could tackle in Jakarta EE messaging. So when I talk about a message listener, this is really what I mean. So today you can kind of sort of do this using message-driven beans, but very antiquated syntax, right? It's very far from modern and certainly only usable in an EJB context. You can much improve and make the syntax a lot nicer. You can kind of see that here, right? So you could do things like process messages in batches, order by timestamp or some other characteristic of the metadata. Put in retries, put in retry delays, specify dead letter queues. All of these sort of things are either not available in JB or very vendor specific, and there's no reason to, right? And you can also do things like, for example, concurrency throttling in these kind of environments. This is where something like the max concurrency annotation that would go ultimately in concurrency would come in very handy. This is what I mean by a Bootstrap API, right? Right now, you can't really do this in a vendor-neutral way, but you ought to be able to spin up a JMS instance on its own in a Java SE environment outside of Jakarta EE altogether. This is something we've been talking about since Java E8, Java E7 timeframe. So very long pending and important. We know that there's a demand for it. We know there's value to doing this work. So that's about it. From my side, I'm going to now hand it over to Emily for the rest of the session. Stick around, please. And again, if you want any deeper dive into this, join me on Friday.
Okay, great. Thank you, Reza. So thank you all. And I'm Emily Jiang. I'm working for IBM. I'm a Java champion, and I'm also a cloud native architect. Has been working on Jakarta EE and microprofile.
Emily,
yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. You are sharing your presenter view, so.
Oh, sorry.
All good. Just want to make. There we go. Perfect.
And basically, it's also work on the implementations on Open Liberty. So it's great. I mean, Jakarta EE has been making great progress, recently, since the Jakarta EE 9.1. And if you have not basically tried out Jakarta EE 10, and also the other great news is we just released Jakarta EE 11 web profile this week. Please check it out. And for the carry on with the Jakarta EE 12 is very exciting stuff. Reza already mentioned. I will quickly talk about the rest of the slides. So Jakarta Security. If you have heard of microprofile, in microprofile there's integration spec is a microprofile GWT bridge. So basically make the Jakarta Security work with GWT technologies. And also in microprofile GWT, you can use roles allowed. Hopefully we also add this roles allowed to Jakarta Security as well. And the other thing is kind of Yale-enabled authorization annotation. As you know, people don't really want to use XML to do all the authorization, also role. They find that basically have the role allowed and etc. It's great. Like your Java applications, you can see. Crystal clear, like authorized, has role manager and scheduled office hour, and then you can do the transfer funds. So this is very easy, crystal clear to read the code. And similarly, for the other method, get salary, as a role is manager, and also has an attribute directly reports, and also with the employee ID, and you can get the salary. The other thing is kind of the configuration has been talked about for many years. I can see that since the Java EE years, I'm trying to do the configuration, eventually didn't make it. And in micro profile, this is the first spec ever in micro profile. I'm very proud I was part of it. And we define great basically programming model in micro profile. It's called micro profile config. If you have not watched the discussion recently, like the proposal put forward about host micro profile in Jakarta EE, is one of the major trigger is because Jakarta need a config, and it's great to move macro profile config over to Jakarta. And since that move, it makes more sense, for the two community kind of merge together. So this is kind of Jakarta config. I'm really excited. Hopefully in EE 12, we can basically get a macro profile config in the core profile. And then the Jakarta config will have basically the programmatic lookup and also CDI injection. You can, in this code snippet here, you can inject the maintenance basically it's a property into your application, and then you can define the maintenance property in the system variable or environmental variable or system property or any files. In this case, the meta microprofile-config properties. Maybe it will call just config properties when it move over to Jakarta land. So this is a kind of the very flexible basically configuration, so that basically your application can easily to be configured. So there's many others kind of the features we want to add, like basically in the Java, latest Java, and we will have basically the 21, you have a record and virtual thread. As you can see, the E11 already make use of record and virtual thread, but not every basically spec. And then in E12, it would be great to make the support in JSON binding, and also the in CDI. Basically, we are trying to make a CDI to replace EJB, CDI plus concurrency to replace EJB, but EJB has a startup. And then the people talking about, in CDI already got a startup, basically, or you can observe the startup this event. However, it's not easily to be used. It would be great to introduce basic annotation at eager, similar to EJB at startup. And also batch job, and then is if you know the batch, and then you have to define your job in another file. It will be excellent, and to put the batch job definition basically in the Java classes. And the other thing is basically again I mentioned the CDI plus concurrency, trying to replace the EJB. The other great annotation, the functionality from EJB is basically stateless. Stateless is not same as basically dependent scoped CDI bin. Stateless it is as a transaction associated. So it's so this is built-in as service in CDS steering type. So basically, we'll have a transaction associated with, and plus other scopes and etc. So this is basically trying to get up to offer equivalent EGB functionalities. And also is kind of in the Jakarta persistent, and utilize basically improve the persistence.xml. And also the Jakarta EE would be great to have the Bootstrap APIs. So in the next few slides, I will quickly go through. So this is example, the records support in the JSON binding. So here you can define the record, and eventually you have a basically list of this record. So this is another example, define the jobs with this kind of Fluent APIs to directly build the jobs. So I think the batch users will welcome this feature. A similar thing, this is other service, so has a scope, application scope, the transaction, and then concurrency specified. And then this is basically Bootstrap API for Jakarta EE. So this is kind of no longer you need to have a lot of ceremony to be able to create a Jakarta application. Now it's just like everything's from main. It's similar to the Spring apps. So this is finally we are in the AI era, and if you are wondering about Jakarta EE microprofile AI, story. So it's we are having a basically microprofile Jakarta EE AI discussion, and we have decided to adopt a long-term 4J. And right now there's a GitHub repo and a long-term 4J-macroprofile-Jakarta. So we are going to populate this repo as we speak. So we have meetings every week. Please feel free to log on to the microprofile calendar if you Google that, and then find out the time and then join the discussion. So it would be great to have you around. And earlier, Bruno asked about agentic AI. I really think agentic AI support is very fundamental for this. Basically, the microprofile Jakarta EE AI apps. So with that, I think it's this is a way of contributing to Jakarta EE, and would love to see you in the Jakarta community. So stay tuned and to see the progress on the EE 12. So with that, I think we are towards the end of this topic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much, Reza. Jakarta EE has been around. Technically, the brand itself is not as old as Java EE, but the whole ecosystem of these standards is huge, and it is thanks to the work like yourselves and others that contribute to these standards and other frameworks to build on top of it. I saw this comment on Reddit. Somebody was like, "You know what? I wanna rewrite the servlet API or something like that, because I think the servlet API is too rough." And I think it is, but it has to be, so that other stuff can improve on top of it, and then other stuff can build on top of it. That's how the ecosystem works. If you come up with an API that is just like, this is it, then how do you build on top of that? How do you allow that ecosystem? Jakarta EE allows with technology like Parkers, technology like File, and other frameworks that build on top of these APIs. I'd like to welcome to stage Mark Hackler, our next speaker, who has been advocating for Spring for many years. And it's interesting because Spring builds on top of some of the Jakarta EE APIs as well. So, Mark, are you around?
Hey, everyone.
All right. So we got Mark Hackler here. Mark, do you remember the first time that you wrote your first servlet?
No. It's been long enough ago. I probably don't remember that far back.
It's good that we don't have to write services anymore, but the importance of that particular specification is huge for the world of Java web applications. Whether it's web application per se, whether it's a REST API, all of these things are built on top of the servlet API. Mark, what is the one thing that you feel like Jakarta EE could add to this specification in the coming future?
Oh, that's tough. I mean, obviously everybody's wanting to do AI, and that's very important. But I mean, it's already being incorporated in various different ways in pretty much everything. So I don't think that's any new revolutionary idea. But I think you're gonna see that natively supported in pretty much everything, including Jakarta EE. I have to tell you, I was really concerned that after asking about servlets, you were going to ask about applets, but I'm glad you didn't go there.
Anybody here ever wrote an applet?
Yes, plenty. Yeah, also writing my first servlet as well. But I think for Mark, HTTP3 may be the thing that would be of interest to Spring developers in general.
Yeah, I'll take it. And
Mark,
I refuse to answer on the applet question on the grounds that it may incriminate me. Yes, Emily.
you got to try the Jakarta data.
I
Spring data. I would like to know your feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I'm game to try anything. In fact, I think I was kvetching to Bruno about this a little bit yesterday. My big problem, probably all of us, our big problem is just time. There are so many things. I keep adding things to my list. It's like, when I get a few minutes, I want to try to work on that. And when I get like half a day, I'll explore that. And my list keeps growing. And I do remove things from the list. I get through them, but it seems like it grows faster than I remove. So the queue grows. But yes, I'll add that to my list. Yeah.
You need the AI agent.
I use AI agents actually, but the problem is that after a point, I mean, you still have to learn it to understand it. So the agent can do a lot for you, but it can't learn for you. It can just learn for itself. So, so to speak.
Yeah, agents are fascinating, but I feel like we are going from code reviewers to AI output reviewers. At the end of the day, like we as developers always want to I want to review less code, especially other people's code, and I like to contribute, but it's kind of boring reviewing all this code. But now with AI writing code for us, everyone is becoming a reviewer. Everyone is reviewing code every day. That has become the standard now.
Well, there was some kind of a cartoon that somebody had drawn about, using AI to craft your email. And then on the other end, somebody uses AI to summarize the email that AI wrote on behalf of someone else. So it's interesting where things are going, but in most ways good, but occasionally something that just is kind of hilarious. So
I think we're getting to a point where we're going to have to say this was not generated by AI and have a certified stamp on it.
Yes.
We would just assume that everything got generated by AI, whether it's code, documentation, emails, presentations, it doesn't really matter. We'll just assume everything is AI. We'll need a stamp saying this was not generated by AI.
Probably safer, yeah.
All right. Reza, thank you so much for your presentation. Emily, thank you so much for joining us as well.
Good to see you both again.
Yeah, good to see you. Bye.